When Sarah Chen spent her last $200 on a foreclosed farmhouse in rural Nebraska, she had no idea the crumbling property contained the largest undiscovered oil reserve in North America, that petroleum giants would descend within days, offering millions, and that her desperate gamble would spark a David versus Goliath battle that would reshape energy policy, environmental law, and prove that sometimes the most worthless-looking investments hold the power to change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bitter October wind whipped across the Nebraska plains as Sarah Chen stood before what could only be described as agricultural apocalypse. At 29, the former environmental science teacher had never imagined she'd be counting food stamps while her 5-year-old son Lucas fought leukemia with borrowed medications and prayers. The foreclosure notice in her hands felt heavier than paper should, but the property deed felt even heavier. $200, her final $200, spent on 40 acres of what the bank had labeled worthless agricultural wasteland. "Mommy, it looks like a ghost house," Lucas whispered from his car seat, his bald head covered by a Superman cap that no longer fit quite right after months of chemotherapy. The farmhouse before them sagged like a broken promise, its white paint long since surrendered to the elements, leaving raw wood exposed to decades of harsh winters and blazing summers. Half the windows were boarded up, the other half spider-webbed with cracks that caught the dying light like fractured mirrors. Sarah forced cheerfulness into her voice, the same way she'd been forcing optimism for the past year. "Ghost houses. Just need the right people to bring them back to life, buddy. That's us. We're the Ghostbusters." Lucas giggled weakly, the sound both heartbreaking and life-giving. She unstrapped him carefully, mindful of the central line that snaked under, his small shirt connecting to the portable chemotherapy pump they'd been sent home with. The insurance company had deemed him stable enough for outpatient management, though Sarah suspected it had more to do with cost-cutting than medical assessment. The auction had been brutal. Standing among ranchers, investors, and developers, Sarah had been the object of curious stares and whispered speculation. What was a single mother with a sick child doing bidding on worthless farmland? When the auctioneer hammered down on her $200 bid, she'd caught several people, shaking their heads in what looked like pity. The property had been on the market for 3 years, 3 foreclosures, no takers except desperate fools. "Mrs. Chen," the bank representative, a nervous man named Gerald Morton, approached with papers flapping in the wind. "I need to remind you this is an as-is sale. No utilities connected, water well status unknown. The house hasn't been inspected for habitability. Are you certain about this decision?" His voice carried the tone of someone trying to save her from herself. Sarah looked at Lucas, then at the farmhouse that would either be their salvation or their final mistake. "I'm certain." Gerald handed her the keys, a single brass key attached to a John Deere keychain, probably older than she was. The weight of it surprised her. As Gerald's car disappeared down the dirt road, leaving tire tracks in the mud like an exit wound, Sarah stood in perfect silence, except for the wind and Lucas's occasional cough. "Let's explore our new home," she said, carrying him toward the house. The porch creaked ominously under their combined weight, each step a small act of faith that the boards wouldn't give way. The front door opened with the screech of hinges that hadn't moved in years, releasing the smell of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through broken windows. Inside, the house told stories of better times. Faded floral wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing plaster walls stained with water damage. The kitchen cabinets hung, open empty except for dust and dead insects. A family had lived here once, loved here, dreamed here, failed here. "It's like a puzzle, Mommy," Lucas observed, pointing at the patches of missing floorboards. "We have to put it back together." Sarah's throat tightened. His optimism, even in the face of everything they'd lost, never failed to inspire and break her heart simultaneously. "That's exactly right, baby. We're puzzle masters." The house had electricity, though Sarah suspected it wouldn't pass any kind of safety inspection. She'd brought camping supplies, battery-powered lanterns, and enough canned food for a week. The plan was simple: make the house minimally livable, find work in the nearby town of Cedar Falls, get Lucas enrolled in the rural health clinic, and somehow build a life from the ashes of their old one. That night, as they slept on an air mattress in the living room, surrounded by boxes that contained everything they owned, Sarah allowed herself to hope. Perhaps it was just exhaustion, but she felt something in this place. Peace, maybe, or possibility. She woke before dawn to the sound of vehicles. Multiple vehicles, heavy engines idling outside their new home. Sarah moved to the window and nearly dropped her phone. 3 black SUVs and a white van had pulled up in their yard. Men in expensive suits were climbing out, briefcases in hand, looking like FBI agents or insurance adjusters. Lucas stirred on the air mattress. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Before she could answer, a knock came at the door. Not a polite knock, but the kind of authoritative rap that demanded immediate response. Sarah quickly pulled on jeans and a sweater, checking that Lucas's medical equipment was properly connected before opening the door. "Mrs. Chen." The man speaking looked to be in his 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses rather than manual labor. Behind him stood 4 other men, all radiating corporate authority. "I'm Director James Henderson, from Titan Energy Corporation. We need to talk." "It's 6 in the morning," Sarah said, instantly defensive. Experience had taught her that when men in suits appeared at dawn, it rarely meant good news, "and I don't know who you are or what you want." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Henderson's smile was professionally reassuring and completely cold. "Mrs. Chen, you've purchased property that contains something of significant value to our company. We're prepared to make you an offer that will solve all your financial concerns. May we come in?" "Absolutely not." Sarah's voice carried the steel that teaching middle school environmental science had given her. "You can speak to me from where you are, or you can leave. Your choice." Henderson exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Very well, Mrs. Chen, our geological surveys indicate that your property sits on substantial mineral reserves. Oil, specifically. We're authorized to offer you $5 million for the mineral rights. Cash. Today." Sarah's world tilted. $5 million. For mineral rights to land she'd bought for $200 less than 24 hours ago. That's not possible. This land has been for sale for 3 years. If there was oil here, someone would have found it. "Technology advances, Mrs. Chen. Our new seismic mapping has identified reserves that previous surveys missed. This is a limited-time offer." Henderson nodded to one of his associates, who opened a briefcase revealing neatly stacked bundles of cash. $5 million. Today, sign these papers, and your financial worries are over. Your son's medical bills, college education, your future security, all of it solved. Lucas appeared beside her, rubbing his eyes. "Mom? Who are the men in suits?" Henderson's expression softened as he noticed the boy's condition. The baseball cap couldn't hide the pallor of chemotherapy, the thinness that spoke of a body fighting for its life. "Mrs. Chen," Henderson's voice dropped to something approaching compassion. "I have children too. I know what medical bills can do to a family. This money could pay for the best treatments available, experimental therapies, private specialists, everything your son needs." Sarah felt the weight of temptation. $5 million would indeed solve everything. Lucas could have the best. Doctors, experimental treatments not covered by insurance, a chance at a normal childhood after beating cancer. They could have a real home, security, hope. I need time to think. I'm afraid that's not possible, Henderson replied, the compassion evaporating. Market conditions are extremely volatile. This offer expires at noon today. After that, he shrugged. Well, let's just say other opportunities may arise that wouldn't be as lucrative for you. There was something in his tone that made Sarah's environmental science background kick in. What kind of opportunities? What exactly have you found on my land? Henderson's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something predatory. Mrs. Chen, you're a smart woman. You understand that natural resources belong to those with the means to extract them responsibly. We're offering you a chance to benefit from that process. I strongly advise you to take it. Get off my property. The words surprised even Sarah with their firmness. If you want something from my land, you can go through proper legal channels. Until then, you're trespassing. Henderson's face hardened. Mrs. Chen, you're making a mistake, a very serious mistake. This land isn't suitable for residential use. Environmental hazards, safety concerns. It would be unfortunate if local authorities had to intervene for your child's safety. The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Sarah stepped back, pulling Lucas behind her. I said, get off my property, now. The men retreated, but Henderson paused at his vehicle. Noon, Mrs. Chen, think about your son. As they drove away, leaving dust clouds in their wake, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, her mind reeling. Lucas sat beside her, his small hand finding hers. Are we going to be rich, Mommy? He asked innocently. Sarah looked at her son, then at the land stretching around them. 40 acres of worthless farmland that oil companies would pay $5 million for. Something didn't add up. I don't know, baby. But we're going to find out what's really going on here. The rest of the morning blurred together. Sarah set Lucas up with activities inside, making sure his medical alarms were set, then spent time walking the property. She'd learned to read landscapes during her teaching years, to spot environmental indicators that others missed. The land was unusual, areas where nothing grew despite rich soil elsewhere. Spots where the earth seemed to shimmer slightly in the morning light. Strange odors that came and went with the wind. She was examining a particularly barren patch when her phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Chen? This is Rebecca Martinez from the Environmental Protection Agency. We've had reports of potential contamination. Issues on your property. I'd like to schedule a visit. Contamination issues from who? Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle starting to form, though the picture was still unclear. Did someone from Titan Energy contact you? There was a pause. Mrs. Chen, I think we should talk in person. Are you available this afternoon? After agreeing to meet the EPA representative at 3, Sarah returned to the house to find Lucas coloring at the makeshift table they'd set up. His latest artwork showed stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a rainbow overhead. That's beautiful, honey. Tell me about it. Lucas pointed to each figure. That's you, that's me, and that's our new house. The rainbow means everything's going to be okay. Sometimes children possessed wisdom that adults had forgotten. Sarah kissed the top of his head, breathing in the familiar scent of hospital soap and hope. At precisely noon, her phone rang. Henderson, Mrs. Chen, our offer expires in 30 seconds, final chance. Sarah ended the call without speaking. At 12:01, vehicles returned to her driveway. Not SUVs this time, but a convoy of white trucks with Titan Energy logos. Men in coveralls began unloading equipment. Sarah stepped onto the porch. "What do you think you're doing?" she called out. A foreman approached, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Chen, we have legal authority to conduct geological surveys on this property. Federal mineral rights supersede surface ownership in cases of national energy security." That's impossible. I just bought this land. The foreman handed her papers, legal documents, government seals, authority to conduct emergency resource assessment. Sarah scanned the paperwork, her environmental law background telling her this was either legitimate or sophisticated fraud. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises while we conduct our survey, the foreman continued. Temporary relocation assistance will be provided. Sarah looked at Lucas, watching from the window, then at the men setting up what looked like drilling equipment. I'm not going anywhere. If you have legal authority, you'll work around us. This is our home. The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of a government vehicle, EPA logo on the door. Rebecca Martinez emerged, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who'd fought bureaucratic battles and won. She surveyed the scene, then approached Sarah. Mrs. Chen, I'm Rebecca Martinez. I think we need to talk, privately. They walked away from the industrial activity, Lucas safely inside with his educational videos. Rebecca spoke quietly. Mrs. Chen, what I'm about to tell you is confidential until we complete our investigation. We've been monitoring Titan Energy for months. They've been using fraudulent geological surveys to acquire mineral rights, then claiming environmental necessity to bypass normal legal processes. Are you saying they're lying about the oil? Rebecca shook her head. No, there's definitely oil here. Potentially massive reserves. But there's something else Titan knows that they're not telling you. Something that makes this land far more valuable than $5 million. Sarah felt her world shifting again. What kind of something? Rebecca looked over at the drilling, equipment being set up. The oil here isn't ordinary crude. Initial analyses suggest it's a previously unknown variation with properties that could revolutionize clean energy production. If processed correctly, it could be the bridge between fossil fuels and renewable energy we've been searching for. Titan wants to extract it using traditional methods that would destroy these unique properties for profit. But if it's that important, why? Sarah began. Because, Mrs. Chen, you have something Titan doesn't expect. You have legal ownership and a background in environmental science. You could fight them properly. You could ensure this resource is developed responsibly, in a way that benefits your family and the environment. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The $200 she'd spent hadn't just bought her shelter for her dying son. It had bought her control over a resource that could change the world. The question was, did she have the strength to fight for it? Rebecca handed her a card. There are people who can help. Environmental lawyers, clean energy researchers, advocates for responsible resource development. This doesn't have to be David versus Goliath, but it will be a fight. Sarah looked at the card, then at her house where Lucas was safe and warm, coloring pictures of better tomorrows. What happens if I do nothing, if I take their money and walk away? Rebecca's expression was grave. Titan extracts the oil using environmentally destructive methods. The unique properties are lost forever. Other companies follow their model. And in 20 years we look back at this moment as the time we could have changed everything, but chose safety instead. Through the window, Sarah could see Lucas holding up his latest artwork. This one showed a woman in a cape flying over fields of green. His superhero mother, saving the world one drawing at a time. What happens if I fight? Sarah asked. Rebecca smiled for the first time since arriving. Then we find out what you're really made of, Mrs. Chen, and maybe, just maybe, we save the world. The EPA investigation changed everything. Rebecca Martinez returned the next morning with a team of environmental scientists, geological surveyors, and legal advisors who transformed Sarah's property into a bustling hub of scientific activity. While Titan Energy's crew continued their intrusive drilling operations on one side of the land, the EPA team worked methodically on the other. their equipment more sophisticated, their approach more respectful of the environment they were studying. Lucas watched the proceedings from his wheelchair on the newly repaired porch, his medical equipment beeping softly as he sketched the scientists in his notebook. Dr. Patricia Kim, the team's lead environmental engineer, had taken a special interest in him explaining their work in terms he could understand. "We're like detectives, Lucas," she said, showing him a soil sample through a microscope. "We're trying to solve the mystery of what makes your mom's land so special." "My mom's smart," Lucas replied with absolute certainty. "She'll figure it out too." Dr. Kim smiled, but Sarah caught the worried glance she exchanged with Rebecca. The preliminary findings were unprecedented. The oil beneath their property wasn't just another fossil fuel deposit. It was a geological anomaly that defied conventional understanding. "Sarah," Rebecca called her aside that afternoon, "what we've found down there challenges everything we know about petroleum formation. This isn't crude oil that formed over millions of years. The molecular structure suggests a much more recent origin, and the chemical composition includes compounds we've never seen before in nature." They stood in the field where Sarah had first noticed the strange shimmer in the soil. Up close, with the right equipment, the phenomenon was even more remarkable. The earth seemed to pulse with subtle energy, and instruments detected electromagnetic signatures that had no business existing in farmland. "What does this mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would change everything. Dr. Kim emerged from their mobile laboratory, tablet in hand, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Mrs. Chen, we need to talk, all of us." They gathered in Sarah's kitchen, the scientists crowding around the small table while Lucas napped on the couch nearby. Dr. Kim pulled up images on her tablet. "What we've discovered beneath your property isn't technically oil in the traditional sense. It's a biopetroleum produced by an unknown microorganism colony living deep underground." The room fell silent. Rebecca leaned forward. "Unknown microorganisms," Dr. Kim nodded. "The organisms appear to be converting organic matter into a fuel that burns cleaner than any known energy source. Zero carbon emissions, actually negative emissions. They're sequestering carbon while producing usable energy. If we could understand and replicate this process, we could end the climate crisis," Sarah finished, her environmental science background allowing her to grasp the implications immediately. "But Titan Energy wants to extract it like regular oil, which would destroy the microorganisms and eliminate the process forever," Rebecca confirmed. "They're treating a living, producing ecosystem like a finite resource to be extracted." Sarah walked to the window, watching Titan's drilling operation. Their equipment looked crude and destructive compared to the EPA's careful scientific instruments. "They don't know what they're about to destroy." Dr. Kim joined her at the window. "We don't think they care. Our intelligence suggests Titan's executives are aware of the biological component, but consider it irrelevant to profit margins. They plan to extract everything they can and deal with consequences later." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Sarah opened it to find a woman in her 60s, grey hair pulled back severely, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of barely contained fury. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Margaret Foster, environmental attorney with the Public Interest Law Center. Rebecca Martinez called me. I believe you need legal representation, and corporations like Titan Energy need to be stopped." Margaret entered without invitation, her presence immediately commanding the room. "I've been fighting companies like Titan for 30 years. They're predictable, ruthless, and surprisingly vulnerable when faced with proper legal resistance. The question is, are you prepared for what's coming?" Sarah thought of Lucas sleeping peacefully, unaware that his mother's $200 gamble had placed them at the center of an environmental revolution. What exactly is coming? Margaret opened her briefcase, revealing thick folders of legal documents. Titan will attempt to force extraction through eminent domain claims, environmental emergency declarations, and legal challenges to your property rights. They'll argue national energy security, economic necessity, job creation. They have unlimited resources and no conscience. And we have, Sarah asked. Margaret smiled, and for the first time it wasn't entirely reassuring. We have the truth, legal precedent, public opinion when properly informed, and something. Titan lacks the moral imperative of preserving something irreplaceable for future generations, your son's generation. The next several days blurred together in a whirlwind of legal preparations, scientific documentation, and media attention that Sarah never wanted. Word had leaked about the discovery, and their property became a focal point for environmental activists, energy industry representatives, and journalists from around the world. Sarah found herself thrust into a role she'd never imagined, spokesperson for the future of clean energy. "Mom," Lucas said one morning, watching reporters set up equipment in their yard, "are we famous?" Sarah sat beside him, adjusting his medical equipment. His latest blood work had shown improvement, whether from the new treatment protocol or the reduced stress of having stable housing, she couldn't say. "We're kind of famous, baby, but not the fun kind." Lucas nodded solemnly. "The important kind, like the scientists were helping save the world." Children's ability to distill complex situations to their essence never ceased to amaze her. That's exactly right. Were the important kind of famous. Margaret had been true to her word about Titan's predictability. Legal challenges arrived daily, injunctions, restraining orders, emergency hearings. Titan claimed the extraction was necessary for national energy independence. They argued that Sarah's refusal to allow full extraction threatened economic stability. They even filed complaints suggesting that a sick child living above such volatile, underground resources constituted child endangerment. "It's all theatre," Margaret explained during one of their strategy sessions. "They're trying to exhaust your resources and resolve. But here's what they don't understand. This case isn't just about property rights anymore. It's about corporate responsibility versus environmental stewardship. The whole world is watching." She was right. Environmental groups had adopted Sarah's fight as their own. Scientists from MIT, Stanford, and international research institutions requested access to study the microorganisms. Clean energy advocates held rallies. Lucas's artwork, depicting his superhero mother protecting the Earth, became a symbol of the movement. Someone had made T-shirts featuring his drawing, with proceeds going to childhood cancer research. "I never wanted any of this," Sarah confided to Rebecca one evening as protesters chanted outside their property fence. "I just wanted a home for my son." Rebecca nodded understandingly. "None of the people who change history set out to change history. They just found themselves in a position where doing the right thing required extraordinary courage." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kim had been working around the clock to understand the microorganisms, and her latest discovery changed everything. "Sarah, we need to talk urgently," she said, bursting into the house where Sarah was helping Lucas with his homework. "We've identified not just one species of organism, but an entire ecosystem of interdependent microbes. They've created a self-sustaining biofactory that could theoretically operate indefinitely if left undisturbed." She spread papers across the kitchen table, pointing to microscopic images and chemical formulas. "But here's the really remarkable part. The organisms seem responsive to environmental conditions. When we introduced pollutants to test samples, they adapted, actually accelerating their cleaning processes. They're not just producing clean fuel, they're actively remediating contamination." Sarah stared at the data, her scientific training helping her understand the implications. You're saying they could clean up environmental damage while producing energy? Dr. Kim nodded excitedly. Theoretically, yes. And here's the kicker. We found similar but dormant organisms in soil samples from contaminated sites around the country. It's possible that with the right conditions, this biological process could be replicated elsewhere, turning environmental disasters into clean energy production sites. The revelation transformed the legal battle. Margaret immediately filed new motions, arguing that the discovery constituted a biological treasure of international significance. Environmental groups amplified their pressure on politicians. International environmental organizations petitioned the United Nations to designate the site as a protected biological heritage area. Titan's response was swift and vicious. Henderson returned with a larger team and a different approach. "Mrs. Chen," he said during their tense meeting in her backyard, Lucas watching from behind the screen door, "you're in over your head. This has moved beyond property rights. National security agencies are involved now. Energy independence is a matter of strategic importance." "Threatening me won't change the science," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her calm. "What's under my land could benefit everyone, including your company if developed responsibly." Henderson's smile was coldly amused. "Mrs. Chen, you're a middle school teacher facing the combined resources of major corporations and government agencies. You have a sick child and medical bills. We're prepared to increase our offer to $10 million. Take the money. Disappear. Give your son the life he deserves." Sarah looked through the screen door at Lucas, who was arranging his toy soldiers. In formation, muttering about protecting the planet. "Mr. Henderson, my son is already living the life he deserves. He's learning that some battles are worth fighting, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite it, and that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences." Henderson's expression hardened. "Very well. But understand this, we will extract those resources, with your cooperation or without it. The legal system favors deep pockets and political connections. You're fighting a war you cannot win." After he left, Sarah found Lucas at the kitchen table, writing in his journal. "What are you working on, sweetie?" "A letter to the president," he said matter-of-factly. "I'm telling him about our special dirt and why it's important to keep. It's safe." Sarah read over his shoulder, her heart swelling as she saw his careful handwriting, explaining that the microorganisms were tiny heroes living underground who could help fix the world if bad companies didn't hurt them. "Should we send it?" Lucas nodded seriously. "Heroes help other heroes, Mommy. Maybe the president is a hero too." To Sarah's amazement, 3 weeks later, they received a response. Not from the president, but from the director of the Environmental Protection Agency, stating that Lucas's letter had prompted a formal review of the Titan Energy case and that the president was personally briefed on the situation. The tide began to turn. Public opinion, initially focused on the David versus Goliath narrative, shifted as the scientific implications became clear. Clean energy researchers worldwide demanded access to study the organisms. Environmental groups organized peaceful protests that drew thousands. Even some politicians began questioning whether short-term extraction profits justified destroying a potentially revolutionary biological process. Margaret brought good news one afternoon. Federal court has granted a temporary injunction against any extraction pending environmental impact assessment. We've bought time, but she also brought sobering reality. Titan is fighting this in multiple courts simultaneously. They're claiming economic damage, filing appeals, and lobbying for legislative intervention. The battle is just beginning. Sarah found strength in unexpected places. Letters arrived daily from around the world, supporting their fight. Children sent artwork depicting the tiny heroes in the soil. Scientists offered research collaboration. Environmental activists organized fundraising campaigns to help with legal costs. Lucas's artwork had gone viral, turning a 5-year-old's imagination into a symbol of hope. "Mom," Lucas said one evening as Sarah tucked him into bed, "are we superheroes?" Sarah smiled, adjusting his Superman pajamas. "I think maybe we are, baby. Just regular people who decided to do the right thing." "The best kind of superheroes," Lucas agreed sleepily. "The kind that help everyone." Dr. Kim's research continued yielding remarkable results. The microorganisms weren't just producing clean fuel. They were demonstrating adaptive intelligence, responding to environmental changes in ways that seemed almost purposeful. Their energy output increased when exposed to certain frequencies of sound and light. They thrived in previously contaminated soil, suggesting they could rehabilitate damaged ecosystems while producing power. "Sarah," Dr. Kim explained during one of their evening discussions, "what we're looking at isn't just an energy source. It's a living system that could reshape our understanding of environmental restoration. These organisms don't just survive in hostile conditions. They transform them into healthy ecosystems." The implications grew daily. International scientific consortiums requested samples. Environmental organizations lobbied the United Nations for heritage protection. Clean energy advocates held rallies featuring Lucas's artwork. The property that Sarah had bought for her last $200 had become ground zero for a global environmental movement. But with attention came pressure. Titan escalated their tactics, filing lawsuits claiming Lucas's medical condition constituted child endangerment in an unstable biological environment. They brought in expert witnesses, claiming the microorganisms posed unknown health risks. They lobbied politicians about energy independence and national security. "They're desperate," Margaret observed after another brutal court session. "When corporations resort to attacking sick children to protect profits, it reveals who they really are. But it also makes them dangerous. Desperate entities do desperate things." Sarah learned this firsthand when she discovered surveillance, equipment hidden around their property. Not just cameras, but sophisticated monitoring devices tracking their movements, conversations, even Lucas's medical data transmissions. The realization that her son's private medical information was being monitored crossed every line. "This ends now," Sarah told Margaret during an emergency meeting. "They want to fight dirty? They've just declared war on a mother protecting her child." Margaret's smile was predatory. "Mrs. Chen, I think they've severely underestimated exactly who they're dealing with. Shall we show them the consequences of threatening a child with cancer?" The counterattack was swift and devastating. Margaret had documented every illegal surveillance device, every privacy violation, every unethical tactic. The FBI raid on Titan's local operations made national news. Corporate executives were arrested for industrial espionage, medical privacy violations, and harassment. The public relations disaster for Titan was absolute. Henderson's final visit was different. Gone was the corporate arrogance, replaced by resignation. "Mrs. Chen, my employers have decided to reassess their position. We're prepared to negotiate. A different arrangement, perhaps a partnership approach to development." Sarah studied the man who had threatened her family, tried to steal her land, and violated her son's privacy. "Mr. Henderson, there's only one arrangement I'm interested in. Your company leaves my property, respects the legal process, and if there's any development of this resource in the future, it's done ethically, scientifically, and with respect for the biological systems involved." Henderson nodded slowly. "The board of directors has authorized me to accept those terms. With appropriate legal frameworks and scientific oversight, of course." After he left, Lucas looked up from his coloring. "Did we win, Mommy?" Sarah picked up her son, marveling at how much stronger he felt, how his recent medical reports showed continued improvement. "We won something more important than beating them, baby. We won the right to do this the right way." "The superhero way," Lucas added with satisfaction. The transformation had begun not just in their personal circumstances, but in how the world approached the potential beneath their feet. International scientific teams arrived to study the organisms. Universities established research facilities nearby. The EPA created a new category of protected biological sites. Lucas's artwork adorned the walls of the primary research facility, reminding everyone that sometimes the most important discoveries are protected by the purest motivations. As winter snow covered the Nebraska plains, Sarah stood on her porch, watching scientists work by floodlight, carefully studying the miracles beneath their feet. In 6 months, she'd gone from spending her last $200 on worthless land to protecting one of the most significant environmental discoveries in human history. Lucas appeared beside her in his new winter coat, his hair finally starting to grow back as his cancer responded to treatment. "Mummy, when I grow up, I want to be like the microorganisms. I want to help heal things that are broken." Sarah pulled him close, breathing in the scent of hope and determination. "You already do that, baby, every day just by being you." The fight wasn't over. Legal battles continued. Scientific research would take years. The development of this resource would require unprecedented cooperation between environmental groups, scientists, and energy companies. But the foundation had been laid by a desperate mother's $200 gamble and a 5-year-old's unwavering belief that heroes help other heroes. Standing there in the Nebraska winter, watching scientists work to unlock secrets that could save the world, Sarah understood that some purchases don't just buy property, they buy purpose. They buy the chance to prove that ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances can choose courage over comfort, right over easy, future over profit. The microorganisms continued their work beneath the snow, transforming contamination into clean energy, turning waste into hope. Above ground, a mother and son had learned that sometimes the most worthless-looking investments hold the power to change everything. The $200 hadn't just bought them shelter, it had bought them a chance to heal the world. 3 months after Titan Energy's retreat, Sarah's property had transformed into something resembling a small university campus. The International Institute for Bioenergy Research had established its headquarters in a series of eco-friendly buildings that seemed to grow organically from the Nebraska landscape. Dr. Kim had been appointed as the Institute's director, and she'd insisted that Sarah join as co-director, recognizing that protecting the discovery required someone who understood both its scientific importance and its human impact. "Mom, Dr. Martinez wants to show us something amazing," Lucas announced, wheeling through the front door of their renovated farmhouse. His latest scans had shown no signs of cancer, and his energy levels were steadily improving. The oncologist attributed his remarkable recovery partially to reduced stress, stable housing, and access to experimental treatments made possible by their transformed circumstances. Rebecca Martinez had become more than just the EPA representative overseeing the site. She'd become family. She appeared in the doorway behind Lucas, her face glowing with excitement. "Sarah, wait until you see what the Jakarta team discovered. They've successfully replicated the process in Indonesian contaminated rice paddies." Sarah followed them to the main research facility, where wall-mounted screens displayed live feeds from research sites around the globe. The discovery had sparked international collaboration, unlike anything seen in environmental science. Teams in 6 countries were working to understand and replicate the microorganisms' unique properties, each site chosen for its environmental damage that needed healing. Look at this. Dr. Kim pointed to satellite images showing before and after shots of a former copper mining site in Chile. The organisms we introduced 6 weeks ago haven't just survived. They've begun transforming the toxic runoff into usable biomass while producing clean energy. Local communities that hadn't been able to grow crops for 20 years are reporting soil recovery. The implications rippled beyond environmental restoration. The Indonesian rice paddies weren't just being cleaned, they were producing enough bioenergy to power the surrounding villages, while the cleaned soil yielded greater harvests than ever recorded. The Chilean mining site was now generating electricity for the regional grid while sequestering carbon and neutralizing heavy metals. It's working everywhere we try it, Rebecca explained, pulling up data from monitoring stations worldwide. But each site requires careful calibration. The organisms adapt to local conditions, but they need the right balance of nutrients, pH levels, and environmental conditions to thrive. Sarah studied the data, her environmental science background helping her understand the delicate complexity involved. And the energy companies? How are they responding to losing extraction rights? Dr. Kim smiled grimly. Most are fighting it, of course. But some are adapting. Ecotech Industries has partnered with us to develop sustainable extraction methods that work with the organisms rather than destroying them. They're finding that patience and cooperation yield better long-term profits than destructive extraction. Lucas had wandered to his favorite corner of the lab, where a special microscope allowed him to observe the microorganisms in real time. He'd become the unofficial mascot of the research facility, and the scientists had learned that his unique perspective often led to breakthrough insights. "Dr. Kim," he called out excitedly, "the little guys are dancing today. They look really happy." Dr. Kim hurried over, adjusting the microscope settings. What she saw made her gasp. "Sarah, come look at this. The organisms are exhibiting coordinated movement patterns we've never seen before." On the screen, the microscopic creatures moved in perfect synchronization, creating complex geometric patterns that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. "Lucas, what makes you think they look happy?" Lucas pointed to the screen with the confidence of a 5-year-old who'd spent months watching these creatures. "See how they're all moving together? Like when I feel good after my medicine and want to dance, they're dancing because something good is happening." Dr. Kim checked her instruments and froze. He's right. Energy output has increased by 30% in the last hour, but we haven't changed any environmental conditions. She began typing rapidly, pulling up data from other research sites. "Wait, Sarah, look at this. Sites in Chile, Indonesia, Nigeria, all showing synchronized increases in activity at exactly the same time." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "They're communicating," Sarah whispered. "Across continents, they're somehow coordinating globally." Rebecca pulled up a world map showing all active research sites. Each location pulsed with light indicating microorganism activity, and the pulses were synchronized across thousands of miles. "It's not possible," Dr. Kim muttered, then caught herself. "I've said that about this discovery multiple times, and I've been wrong every time." Lucas tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, maybe they're not just cleaning the earth. Maybe they're talking to each other about how to help more." Children's wisdom struck again. As they watched, the synchronized patterns continued, suggesting a level of biological coordination that challenged fundamental assumptions about microbial intelligence. Dr. Kim was already on the phone with research teams worldwide, and their reports confirmed what they were witnessing, a global biological network operating at the microscopic level. The discovery made international headlines within hours. "Living Earth Network discovered," read one headline. Global Microorganism Internet Cleaning Planet proclaimed another. The scientific community was in upheaval. Environmental groups were ecstatic and energy companies were scrambling to understand what this meant for their industries. But for Sarah, the most important result was closer to home. Lucas's latest medical tests showed not just remission, but cellular regeneration that his doctors described as unprecedented. Living above the microorganisms, breathing air filtered by their processes, drinking water purified by their activities, had somehow contributed to his healing in ways medical science couldn't yet explain. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Patricia Williams, Lucas's oncologist, explained during his latest checkup, "I've never seen cellular recovery like this in a pediatric cancer patient. While I can't definitively attribute it to environmental factors, the correlation with your proximity to these organisms is remarkable." The medical implications prompted a new research avenue. Dr. Kim established a biomedical research division, partnering with leading cancer research centers to study potential therapeutic applications of microorganism-processed environments. Lucas became their first case study, the child whose recovery might unlock new approaches to treatment through environmental healing. "Mom," Lucas said one afternoon as they walked through the restored farmland, now dotted with monitoring stations and research equipment, "do you think the little guys know they're helping me get better?" Sarah watched her son run ahead, his energy levels now completely normal, his hair thick and healthy, his laughter filling the air. "I think they know exactly what they're doing, baby, and I think they care." The international attention brought unexpected visitors. Delegations from the European Union arrived to study the site as a model for environmental restoration. Representatives from small island nations facing climate change came seeking solutions for their contaminated soils. Indigenous leaders from communities affected by industrial pollution traveled thousands of miles to learn about biological remediation. One particularly meaningful visit came from Maria Santos, a grandmother from a Mexican village where decades of mining had left the soil barren and toxic. Through a translator, she told Sarah, "My grandchildren cannot play in the earth where I played as a child. The water makes them sick. If this miracle could heal our land." Sarah found herself in an unexpected role, ambassador for hope. She spoke at international conferences, testified before congressional committees, and addressed United Nations assemblies about the discovery that had started with her last $200. But she always brought the message back to human impact, to communities like theirs that needed more than just clean energy. They needed renewed hope. The economic transformation of their region was equally dramatic. Cedar Falls, the nearest town, had been struggling with population decline and business closures. Now it bustled with international researchers, environmental technology companies, and eco-tourists. Local farmers found new purpose, partnering with research teams to test biological restoration methods on their land. "Sarah," announced June Peterson, Cedar Falls mayor, during a community meeting, "we've gone from a town people left to a destination people seek. Property values have tripled, but more importantly, young people are staying, starting families, building futures here." The ripple effects extended far beyond economics. Lucas started a youth environmental program, teaching other children about the tiny heroes beneath their feet. His drawings and presentations, now professionally produced with the help of the Institute, had become educational tools used in classrooms worldwide. "I want kids everywhere to know they can help save the planet," Lucas explained to a documentary crew filming his story. "You don't have to be big or strong. You just have to care and not give up." His words, delivered with the earnest conviction of a 6-year-old cancer survivor, moved audiences globally. Sarah established the Helena's Children Foundation, named after her mother, dedicated to helping families facing medical and environmental crises. The foundation provided legal support, medical funding, and advocacy for communities dealing with environmental contamination. Margaret Foster had joined. As chief legal counsel, her decades of experience now backed by resources that made real change possible. "We're not just protecting one site anymore," Margaret explained to a group of environmental lawyers during a training conference held at the Institute. "We're creating a legal framework for community-driven environmental protection, the Chen protocols, referring to the legal strategies developed during their battle with Titan, are being adopted by communities worldwide." But perhaps the most profound change was in Sarah herself. The desperate mother who'd spent her last $200 on worthless land had become an internationally recognized advocate for environmental justice. Universities offered her honorary doctorates. Environmental organizations sought her. Leadership. Publishers competed for the rights to her story. "I never wanted to change the world," she reflected during an interview with 60 Minutes. "I just wanted a safe place for my son to heal. But maybe that's how change actually happens. Ordinary. People doing ordinary things with extraordinary determination." The research continued yielding surprises. The microorganisms responded to music, particularly classical compositions, with increased energy production. They showed preference for certain light frequencies that enhanced their remediation capabilities. Most remarkably, they demonstrated what could only be described as learning behavior, adapting their processes based on environmental challenges they encountered. Dr. Kim published papers that revolutionized understanding of microbial intelligence. "We're not dealing with simple organisms following programmed responses," she wrote in Nature. "These microorganisms exhibit collective problem-solving abilities that suggest a form of distributed intelligence we're only beginning to understand." The global network continued expanding. Research teams identified suitable contaminated sites on every continent. Communities that had suffered environmental damage for generations watched their lands begin to heal. Energy independence became achievable for remote regions that had never had reliable power access. Government policies evolved to protect and promote biological remediation. The Chen Amendment to the Environmental Protection Act established legal frameworks for protecting sites with unique biological systems. International treaties recognized environmental restoration through biological means as a human right and global priority. Lucas, now 7 and completely cancer-free, had become an unexpected environmental spokesman. His children's book, The Tiny Heroes Underground, illustrated with his own artwork, topped bestseller lists worldwide. The proceeds funded environmental education programs in developing nations. "Do you miss being just a regular family?" A reporter asked Sarah during the book launch event. Sarah looked at Lucas, signing copies of his book for children, who saw him as proof that anybody could make a difference. "We still are a regular family. We just learned that regular families can do extraordinary things when they have to." The anniversary of their arrival at the farm became an international celebration of environmental hope. Thousands gathered on the property, now transformed into a beautiful campus of research facilities, restored prairie, and educational gardens. The original farmhouse remained their home, though now it was surrounded by the infrastructure of humanity's most ambitious environmental project. Standing on the same porch where she'd first confronted Titan Energy, Sarah watched delegates from 50 nations ceremonially plant seeds in soil that a year ago had been considered worthless. Each seed was inoculated with microorganisms that would create pockets of environmental restoration wherever they took root. "Mom!" Lucas called from the crowd, his wheelchair now replaced by leg braces that allowed him to walk, run, and play like any other child. "The president of Kenya wants to meet you. She says her country wants to build their own healing center." Sarah smiled, remembering the terror and desperation of that October morning when she'd handed over her last $200 for land nobody wanted. The fear of not being able to provide for her dying son, the crushing weight of bills and medical expenses, the isolation of facing an impossible situation alone, all of it had led to this moment. The microorganisms continued their work beneath their feet, processing toxins, producing clean energy, and apparently communicating across a global network that suggested life on Earth was far more interconnected than humans had ever imagined. Above ground, their discovery had proved that environmental catastrophe and human ingenuity could combine to create unprecedented positive change. "You know what I've learned?" Sarah told a gathering of environmental science students that evening. "Sometimes the most desperate moments force us to take leaps of faith that turn out to be exactly what the world needed. I thought I was buying land for $200. I was actually investing in the future of the planet." Lucas, now strong enough to stand without assistance, took the microphone with the confidence of a child who'd spent 2 years talking to scientists, reporters, and world leaders. "My mom always tells me that superheroes aren't people with capes who can fly. Superheroes are regular people who do the right thing even when it's scary. The tiny heroes in our soil aren't magic, they're just doing their job of helping. And that's what superheroes do. They help." The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about the thousands of communities worldwide where bioremediation projects were transforming poisoned land into fertile ground, where clean energy production was lifting people out of poverty, where children were growing up believing that environmental problems could be solved through scientific cooperation and human determination. The $200 hadn't just bought them land. It had purchased proof that desperation and hope, science and determination, individual courage and collective action could combine to heal a wounded world. And in healing the earth, they discovered that sometimes the most broken people and places hold the keys to wholeness. As the celebration continued into the night, with scientists and community members sharing stories of environmental restoration successes from around the globe, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a trailer park in their old life to an international center of environmental innovation, from facing eviction to hosting world leaders, from counting pills and counting down days to counting the communities being healed by their discovery. The microorganisms pulsed with bioluminescent energy beneath their feet, part of a global network that seemed to suggest the planet itself was actively participating in its own restoration. Above ground, humans from every nation and background worked together with unprecedented cooperation, united by the understanding that environmental healing and human healing were inseparable. Lucas fell asleep against Sarah's shoulder as fireworks lit up the Nebraska sky, his small hand clutching a drawing of the earth surrounded by tiny glowing helpers. In his dreams, the whole world was gardening together, planting seeds of hope that would grow into forests of possibility. Sarah carried him inside their farmhouse, the same building that had seemed like such a desperate last resort just 18 months ago. Now it was home not just to her family, but to the global headquarters of humanity's most ambitious environmental healing project. As she tucked Lucas into bed, he mumbled sleepily, "Tomorrow, can we check on the babies?" He meant the newest cluster of microorganisms being cultivated for shipment to a contaminated site in Bangladesh. "Of course, sweetie. We'll make sure they're ready to go help their new friends." Lucas smiled and drifted deeper into sleep, dreaming of tiny heroes saving the world, one contaminated site at a time. Sarah stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the lights of the research facility, where scientists from 6 continents worked around the clock to replicate and distribute the organisms that were slowly but steadily healing the planet. $200. Sometimes the best investments were the ones that looked like the worst ideas. Sometimes salvation wore the disguise of desperation. Sometimes the future of the world depended on a single mother's last-ditch effort to save her son. The microorganisms continued their ancient work, transforming poison into purity, waste into energy, despair into hope. And above them, having learned that extraordinary change often begins with ordinary people doing whatever it takes to protect what they love most, a mother and son slept peacefully in their farmhouse, surrounded by proof that miracles were real and available to anyone brave enough to dig deep enough to find them. The tiny heroes underground kept working through the night, and tomorrow they would continue healing the world. 5 years had passed since Sarah Chen first discovered the miraculous microorganisms beneath her Nebraska farmland, and the world had transformed in ways that defied even the most optimistic projections. Standing before the United Nations Climate Assembly in New York, Sarah looked out at representatives from 195 nations who had gathered to sign the Global Bioremediation Accord, a landmark treaty that would establish biological environmental restoration as a fundamental human right and international priority. 5 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed assembly hall, I was a single mother who spent my last $200 on what everyone considered worthless land. I was desperate, scared, and running out of options. Today, that worthless land has helped heal over 50,000 contaminated sites across every continent, provided clean energy to 200 million people, and proved that environmental crisis can become environmental miracle when science, courage, and community work together. In the front row sat Lucas, now 12 years old and cancer-free for over 6 years. Beside him sat Dr. Kim, Rebecca Martinez, and Margaret Foster, the team that had evolved from crisis responders to global leaders in environmental restoration. The boy who had once inspired scientists with his simple drawings of tiny heroes had grown into an articulate young advocate who spoke at schools worldwide about the connection between environmental health and human health. The Chen Martinez Protocols, Sarah continued, referencing the comprehensive framework they'd developed for identifying, protecting, and replicating beneficial microorganism colonies, have now been successfully implemented on every inhabited continent. But what we've learned goes far beyond scientific discovery. We've learned that when ordinary people are given the tools and support to protect their communities, extraordinary change becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The statistics were staggering. Global carbon emissions had dropped by 30% as bioenergy replaced fossil fuels in communities worldwide. Contaminated agricultural land spanning an area larger than Texas had been restored to productivity. Most remarkably, the global network of microorganisms had achieved something scientists had thought impossible, a measurable reversal of environmental damage on a planetary scale. Behind Sarah, massive screens displayed real-time data from monitoring stations around the world. Ocean dead zones were shrinking as coastal communities used modified versions of the organisms to process harmful algae blooms. Former Superfund sites in the United States were becoming productive communities again. Industrial wastelands in China were transforming into model sustainable cities powered entirely by biological energy systems. But perhaps the most profound change, Sarah said, her voice softening as she looked toward Lucas, has been in how we understand the relationship between human health and environmental health. The Helena Institute for Environmental Medicine, which many of you have visited, has documented how communities living near bioremediation sites show dramatic improvements in everything from respiratory health to cancer recovery rates. The Helena Institute, named after Sarah's mother and established on their original property, had become the world's premier research center for studying the interconnection between environmental restoration and human healing. Lucas had been their first documented case, but thousands of others followed. Children with asthma found their symptoms disappearing. Adults with autoimmune conditions experienced unexpected remissions. Communities that had suffered generations of pollution-related health problems watched their children grow up healthier than their parents had ever imagined possible. Dr. Patricia Williams, now the Institute's Director of Medical Research, had published groundbreaking studies on what she termed environmental healing. The microorganisms didn't just clean toxins from the environment, they produced compounds that actively supported human immune systems and cellular repair processes. The microorganisms are teaching us, Dr. Williams had told Sarah during their most recent consultation about Lucas's continued remarkable health. They're showing us that healing environments create healing bodies. Your son isn't just surviving. He's thriving because he's living in an ecosystem specifically designed by nature to restore life. Lucas himself had become something of a phenomenon. His children's book series, The Tiny Heroes, had sold over 50 million copies worldwide, with proceeds funding environmental education programs in developing nations. But more importantly, he'd become a bridge between the scientific community and young people worldwide who saw environmental protection not as a burden, but as an adventure. When I was little and really sick, Lucas had told a gathering of young climate activists the previous week, I felt like the world was broken and I was broken too. But then we found out that even the tiniest things can fix the biggest problems. The bacteria under our farm aren't magic. They're just really good at their job, and their job is helping everything around them be healthier. The global bioremediation accord that the nations were about to sign represented more than environmental policy. It was a fundamental shift in how humanity approached its relationship with Earth. Rather than viewing the planet as a resource to be extracted from, the treaty established frameworks for working with natural systems to create mutually beneficial outcomes. Margaret Foster, now serving as the International Environmental Justice Advocate, had spent 3 years negotiating the treaty's legal frameworks. What Sarah and Lucas discovered wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, she explained to the Assembly during her presentation. It was proof that environmental justice and social justice are inseparable. Communities that were most harmed by environmental destruction have become the leaders in environmental restoration. The Riverside Trailer Park in Alabama, where Sarah had helped Kesha Williams identify the second major microorganism colony, had become a model sustainable community. The contaminated land that had threatened to displace its residents was now producing enough clean energy to power 3 counties while providing economic opportunities through ecotourism and research partnerships. We've created over 2 million jobs worldwide through bioremediation projects, Sarah continued in her address. But these aren't just any jobs, they're positions that require communities to understand and care for their local environments. We've turned environmental protection into economic empowerment. The success stories were endless. Former coal mining communities in Appalachia had become leaders in biological energy production. Aboriginal communities in Australia had combined traditional land management with microorganism cultivation to restore damaged ecosystems while maintaining cultural connections to their ancestral territories. Urban communities in Detroit had transformed abandoned industrial sites into thriving neighborhoods powered by underground biological systems. Perhaps most dramatically, the island nation of Vanuatu had become the world's first carbon-negative country by implementing comprehensive bioremediation across all its inhabited islands. President Maria Kalsakau had traveled from Vanuatu specifically to thank Sarah personally. Your discovery gave us hope when rising seas threatened our existence, she said during their private meeting. Now our children will inherit islands that are healthier than when we were born. The scientific collaboration had evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined. The Global Microorganism Monitoring Network, directed by Dr. Kim, tracked biological activity across all continents in real time. The organisms had revealed what scientists now understood as a planetary immune system, a network of biological processes that actively maintained environmental balance. The most humbling discovery, Dr. Kim explained to the assembly, has been realizing that these organisms have always been here, waiting for the right conditions to activate. Human activity had disrupted the very systems that could have prevented environmental crisis. Sarah's discovery wasn't really a discovery at all. It was a rediscovery of partnership with biological systems humans had forgotten existed. The technology transfer programs had been equally transformative. The Sarah Chen International Fellowship Program had brought thousands of young scientists from developing nations to study at the Helena Institute, returning home to establish bioremediation programs tailored to their local environments and needs. Lucas had insisted on speaking during the treaty signing ceremony. At 12, he moved with the confidence of someone who'd grown up at the center of world-changing events, but retained the humility instilled by parents who'd taught him that privilege came with responsibility. When I was 6, Lucas addressed the assembly, his voice clear and strong. I drew pictures of tiny heroes saving the world because I believed it was possible. Now I'm 12, and I know it's not just possible, it's happening. But the tiny heroes aren't just microorganisms. They're also every person in this room who chose to believe that broken things can be fixed, that sick people can get healthy, and that a planet that's been hurt can heal. The audience rose in sustained applause. Sarah felt tears threatening as she watched her son, once so sick she'd counted days, now addressing world leaders about hope and healing. Dr. Williams had told her just that morning that Lucas's latest scans showed not just absence of cancer, but cellular health markers that suggested biological optimization she'd never seen in any patient. The environment doesn't just affect our health, Lucas continued. When we take care of the environment takes care of us. That's what the tiny heroes taught us. That's what my mom's $200 bought, not just land, but proof that helping each other is how everything gets better. The treaty signing itself was conducted with soil samples from bioremediation sites worldwide, symbolically connecting the document to the earth it sought to protect. As each nation's representative signed, they placed a handful of restored soil in a crystal container that would be housed at the Helena Institute, representing humanity's commitment to global environmental healing. Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey as she watched delegates from nations that had been bitter enemies work together on environmental restoration. The urgency of climate crisis had created unprecedented international cooperation. Countries that couldn't agree on trade or politics found common ground in the shared need for biological environmental solutions. The Helena Institute had expanded beyond environmental and medical research. The Lucas Chen Center for Youth Environmental Leadership, established in the 5th year after the discovery, brought together young people from around the world to develop innovative approaches to environmental challenges. Lucas served as its youngest advisor, working with teenagers who saw environmental protection as creative problem-solving rather than limiting restriction. "Mom," Lucas said during the reception following the treaty signing, "remember when you thought buying that farm was the worst financial decision you'd ever made?" Sarah laughed, thinking of Henderson's $5 million offer that had seemed so tempting. "I remember thinking I'd doomed us both." "Instead, you saved everyone," Dr. Martinez interjected, joining their conversation. Rebecca had been promoted to Director of Global Environmental Restoration for the EPA, coordinating international bioremediation efforts. The $200 investment that became humanity's greatest environmental success story. Margaret appeared with updated figures from the Economic Analysis Division. Sarah, the Global Economic Impact Assessment is complete. Bioremediation projects have generated $2 trillion in economic activity, supported 15 million jobs directly and 45 million indirectly, and saved an estimated $12 trillion in environmental damage costs. But for Sarah, the numbers that mattered most were personal. Lucas was healthy, thriving, preparing to enter an advanced environmental science program designed for gifted young scientists. Communities worldwide were breathing cleaner air, drinking purer water, and watching their children grow up in environments that supported rather than threatened their health. The anniversary celebration that evening brought together thousands of people whose lives had been changed by the discovery, farmers whose land had been restored, families whose children had been healed, scientists who dedicated their careers to understanding and replicating the microorganisms, activists who'd fought to protect sites from corporate exploitation. "You know what's most remarkable?" Sarah said during her evening address to the gathering, Lucas standing proudly beside her. "Isn't the science or the technology or even the global cooperation. It's that we learned the solutions were always there, waiting for us to be desperate enough, brave enough, or lucky enough to dig deep enough to find them." The celebration featured traditional music from every culture represented at the treaty signing, performances by children's choirs from communities that had been restored, and exhibitions of art created by young people inspired by the microorganisms' work. Lucas's original drawings were displayed alongside sophisticated scientific visualizations, showing how childhood wonder and scientific rigor had combined to create understanding. As the evening progressed, Sarah found quiet moments to connect with individuals whose stories represented the broader transformation. Elena Rodriguez, whose community in Peru had used modified organisms to restore gold mining damage while creating sustainable livelihoods. James Okafor, whose research in Nigeria had developed strain of organisms specifically effective against oil spill contamination. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose work in Japan had helped communities recover from nuclear contamination through biological remediation. The network effect, Dr. Kim explained during the scientific presentation, has exceeded all projections. The organisms communicate across continents, share adaptive information, and coordinate responses to environmental challenges in ways that suggest a level of biological intelligence we're still discovering. Live satellite feeds showed bioremediation sites around the world pulsing with synchronized bioluminescent activity, the visual representation of a planet actively healing itself with human partnership. Children in the audience gasped with delight as the display showed their local sites connecting with others globally, making the abstract concept of international cooperation tangibly visible. Lucas took the stage one final time that evening, carrying a simple message written by children from every participating nation. "Dear tiny heroes," he read, "thank you for teaching us that the smallest things can fix the biggest problems, that helping each other is how everything gets better, and that the earth knows how to heal itself if we know how to help. We promise to keep learning from you and to remember that every person can be a tiny hero too." As the celebration concluded with a coordinated global moment of silence honoring the microorganisms and all who'd worked to protect them, Sarah stood with her arm around Lucas, surrounded by friends who'd become family and colleagues who'd become lifelong partners in healing the world. The journey from desperate single mother to global environmental leader seemed impossible in retrospect, yet it had unfolded step by step, crisis by crisis, discovery by discovery. The $200 hadn't bought land. It had bought possibility. The worthless farm hadn't been worthless, it had been priceless, waiting for the right person to recognize its value. "What's next, Mom?" Lucas asked as they walked back to their farmhouse, now surrounded by gardens that glowed softly with bioluminescent organisms that had learned to enhance nighttime beauty while continuing their cleaning work. Sarah looked at the research facilities, humming with activity. The international cooperation that had emerged from crisis, the communities worldwide that were thriving because tiny organisms had shown humanity how to heal together. Next, we keep growing, keep learning, keep helping. The tiny heroes showed us the way. Now it's up to us to keep following their example. The microorganisms continued their work beneath their feet, part of a global network that had proved life on Earth was far more interconnected and resilient than humans had understood. Above ground, the community that had grown from desperation into hope continued expanding, welcoming new partners, developing new solutions, and proving daily that the most extraordinary changes often begin with ordinary people doing whatever it takes to protect what they love most. In the distance, the Helena Institute's lights blazed through the night as researchers from dozens of nations worked to understand and replicate the biological miracles that had started with a mother's desperate gamble. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, new communities to heal, new proof that environmental restoration and human thriving were inseparably connected. The tiny heroes underground had taught humanity its most important lesson, that healing the planet and healing each other were the same task, requiring the same courage, the same cooperation, and the same faith that broken things could be made whole again. Sarah's $200 hadn't just bought land, it had bought the future, proving that sometimes the most worthless-looking investments hold the power to save the world. As mother and son headed inside their farmhouse, bioluminescent organisms created a gentle light path to their door, a living reminder that miracles were not only possible, but actively working all around them, waiting for humans wise enough to recognize them, brave enough to protect them, and determined enough to share them with the world. The transformation was complete, yet eternal, a reminder that hope, like the microorganisms themselves, would continue growing, healing, and connecting everything touched by those brave enough to dig deep enough to find it. 10 years after that, desperate October morning, when Sarah Chen spent her last $200 on abandoned farmland, she stood before the most ambitious gathering in human history, the first interplanetary environmental summit at the International Space Station. Through the observation deck's windows, Earth spun below in brilliant blues and greens, its restored atmosphere visibly cleaner than satellite images from a decade ago. Beside her, Lucas, now 17 and preparing for his freshman year at MIT's Biological Systems Engineering program, operated the communication array that would broadcast their message to research stations on the Moon and Mars. 10 years ago, Sarah began, her voice traveling simultaneously to delegates on Earth, the Lunar Research Facility, and the Mars Terraforming Project, we discovered that microscopic life had been waiting patiently for us to understand partnership instead of exploitation. Today, we're not just healing Earth. We're carrying those lessons to other worlds, proving that sustainable life is possible anywhere humans have the wisdom to listen to biology. The summit represented humanity's most audacious achievement, extending environmental restoration principles beyond Earth. The microorganisms that had transformed contaminated sites across the globe had been adapted for space environments, creating the foundation for sustainable human expansion throughout the solar system. Dr. Kim, now Director of Interplanetary Biological Systems, gestured toward screens showing real-time data from 3 worlds. What began as desperate environmental restoration on Earth has become the template for human civilization beyond our planet. Lunar colonies powered entirely by modified bioenergy systems, Martian soil being transformed from toxic regolith into living ecosystem. And here on the station, closed-loop biological systems that not only sustain life, but improve it. Lucas activated holographic displays showing the progression from Earth's first bioremediation site to thriving extraterrestrial colonies. His latest research, conducted during a summer internship at the lunar facility, had discovered that the microorganisms adapted to low gravity by developing enhanced cooperative behaviors, creating even more efficient environmental processing systems. The most amazing thing, Lucas addressed the summit with the poise of someone who'd grown up speaking to world leaders, is that the organisms don't just survive in space, they thrive. They've taught us that life doesn't just adapt to environments, it actively improves them. Every place humans go, we can create ecosystems that make life better for everyone. The statistics from the past decade defied every pessimistic prediction about humanity's environmental future. Earth's atmospheric carbon levels had reached pre-industrial standards for the first time in over a century. Ocean acidification had been reversed. The polar ice caps, once shrinking catastrophically, had stabilized and begun expanding. Most remarkably, biodiversity indices showed the highest levels in recorded history as restored ecosystems supported species recovery on an unprecedented scale. Sarah's journey from desperate single mother to director of human environmental expansion reflected a broader transformation in how humanity approached its relationship with life itself. The Helena Institute had evolved into the central hub for biological engineering, coordinating projects across the solar system while maintaining its original mission of healing through environmental restoration. The children born on lunar colony, reported Dr. Maria Vasquez, the colony's medical director via hologram, show enhanced immune systems, superior bone density despite low gravity, and cognitive development that exceeds Earth norms. The biological environment we've created doesn't just sustain life, it optimizes it. Lucas had spent the previous summer as the youngest research assistant ever at Lunar Colony, studying how the microorganisms had adapted to lunar conditions. His findings had revolutionized understanding of biological systems' potential beyond Earth. The organisms hadn't just survived, they'd developed new capabilities, processing lunar regolith into complex organic compounds that created the foundation for lunar agriculture. What we learned, Lucas explained to the summit, is that the microorganisms are essentially biological architects. On Earth, they repair damage. On Luna, they build from scratch. On Mars, they're terraforming an entire planet. They're not just surviving in alien environments, they're making those environments perfect for life. The Mars Terraforming Project, now in its fourth year, represented humanity's most ambitious environmental engineering project. Modified versions of the Earth microorganisms had been seeded across the Martian surface, beginning the slow process of atmospheric transformation, while creating pockets of livable environment around human settlements. Commander Zhang Wei, broadcasting from Mars Base Alpha, provided updates that seemed like science fiction just a decade earlier. The atmospheric processes are exceeding all projections. We're seeing localized weather pattern formation, primitive but stable ecosystems developing around our settlements, and most significantly, we're producing more oxygen than our colonies consume. Mars is becoming a life-supporting world. Sarah found herself reflecting on the incredible journey as she floated in the zero-gravity observation deck. The farmhouse where she and Lucas had first encountered the miraculous microorganisms was now a protected historical site, preserved exactly as it was on that first night. Millions of visitors annually made pilgrimages to the birthplace of biological expansion, but for Sarah, It remained simply home, the place where desperation had led to discovery. The economic transformation had been equally dramatic. The global biological economy, built around bioremediation, sustainable agriculture and clean energy production, had eliminated poverty in 90% of affected regions. Communities that had been devastated by environmental destruction had become centers of innovation and prosperity. The beautiful irony, noted economist Dr. James Patterson during his presentation to the summit, is that saving the environment became the best economic decision humanity ever made. Biological systems don't just clean up damage, they create value. Communities practicing bioremediation have seen median income increases of 400%, health improvement indices off previous scales, and quality of life metrics that define new standards for human flourishing. But beyond economics, the discovery had catalyzed a fundamental shift in human consciousness. Children growing up in bioremediation communities developed an intuitive understanding of ecological interconnection. Schools worldwide had adopted the Lunar Lucas curriculum, named after Lucas's children's book series that had evolved into comprehensive environmental education programs. Lucas himself had become a bridge between generations, translating scientific complexity into inspiration for young people worldwide. His book series had expanded to cover environmental restoration, space exploration, and the intersection of technology and biology. His latest work, Tiny Heroes Among the Stars, had become required reading in schools from Earth to Mars. "When I was little and sick," Lucas told the younger delegates at the summit, "I thought the world was broken, but the microorganisms showed us that broken is just opportunity in disguise. Everything can be healed, everything can be improved, everything can become better than it was before." The summit also celebrated unexpected discoveries that had emerged from the original research. Dr. Williams, now leading the Interplanetary Health Initiative, had documented how exposure to bioremediated environments affected human physiology. We're seeing generational improvements in immune function, cognitive capacity, and longevity. Children born and raised in these environments represent an evolution in human health that we're still studying. Lucas exemplified this transformation. Not only had he remained cancer-free, but his health markers consistently tested at the top percentile of human performance. His intellect, stamina, and overall vitality seemed enhanced beyond normal human parameters, leading researchers to study whether the microorganisms created environmental conditions that optimized human biological function. The most profound discovery, Dr. Kim explained, has been understanding that the microorganisms don't just clean environments, they optimize them for life. Every species exposed to their processed environments shows improvement across multiple biological markers. They're not just janitors, they're biological enhancers. Personal stories from across the solar system illustrated the broader transformation. Sarah Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, broadcast from Europa Station, where microorganisms were being tested in the Moon's subsurface ocean. "My daughter was born here, breathing air processed by organisms that came from Earth but have adapted to create perfect atmospheric conditions for human life. She's never known environmental anxiety because she's never lived in an environment that wasn't actively working to support her health." The cultural impact had been equally profound. Art, music, and literature created by people living in bioremediated environments showed distinct characteristics: more optimistic, more collaborative, more focused on growth and healing. Psychologists termed it the restoration effect, suggesting that living in environments actively being healed created psychological patterns focused on repair and improvement. Lucas had documented this in his latest research project, studying creativity patterns among children in various environmental conditions. Kids living near bioremediation sites don't just think differently, he reported. They think better, more creatively, more optimistically, more collaboratively. The environment literally shapes how we process reality. The summit also addressed challenges that had emerged. Not all attempts to replicate the microorganism's success had worked. Several projects had failed when corporate interests tried to shortcut the careful ecological balancing required for the organisms to thrive. Environmental protection laws had been strengthened globally after the Dubai incident, where hasty commercial extraction had destroyed a promising new colony before it could establish itself. The microorganisms have taught us patience, Margaret Foster, now serving as Interplanetary Environmental Justice Coordinator, explained. They require respect, understanding, and long-term thinking. They can't be rushed, exploited, or commanded. They have to be partnered with. Sarah had become the unofficial voice of that partnership philosophy. Her book, $200 to the Stars, had become a foundational text for sustainable development practices across worlds. But more than her writings, her life exemplified the transformation possible when desperate circumstances forced innovative thinking. The secret, Sarah told young entrepreneurs during the summit's innovation conference, wasn't the discovery itself. It was being desperate enough to try something everyone else thought was worthless, broke enough to have no choice but to succeed, and stubborn enough to fight for what we found. The Helena Institute had established campuses on Luna and Mars, creating an interplanetary network of research and education focused on biological systems engineering. Lucas was torn between multiple opportunities: early admission to MIT, a research fellowship with the Martian Terraforming Project, or developing his own biological systems startup focused on asteroid mining applications. Whatever you choose, Sarah told him during a quiet moment in the observation deck, remember that the tiny heroes didn't start by trying to change worlds. They started by doing their job, being what they were meant to be, and helping whatever was around them. That's how everything changes. The summit's final session featured a ceremony that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. Representatives from Earth, Luna, Mars, and the various space stations simultaneously planting seeds in soil samples containing microorganisms adapted for each environment. The symbolic act represented humanity's commitment to carrying life-supporting principles wherever they traveled in the universe. Lucas activated a holographic display showing the real-time status of biological systems across human settlements throughout the solar system. Dozens of locations pulsed with indicators showing atmospheric processing, soil development, and ecosystem growth. "Look at this," he said with wonder that hadn't dimmed despite years of working with these systems. "Each place is unique, but they're all connected. The organisms share information across space somehow. They're creating a network of life that spans worlds." The implications were staggering. Data suggested the microorganisms communicated through quantum entanglement, sharing adaptive information instantaneously across vast distances. Earth's environmental recovery was apparently being shared with lunar and Martian colonies, allowing them to develop faster than should have been possible. Dr. Kim's research team had documented what they called interplanetary biological convergence. Problems solved on Mars were somehow being applied to environmental challenges on Earth. Adaptations developed on Luna were appearing in Earth-based colonies without direct contact. The organisms had created a biological internet spanning the solar system. "They're not just healing individual environments," Dr. Kim reported. "They're creating a life-supporting network that connects every human settlement. We're not just surviving in space. We're becoming part of a biological system that makes life better everywhere we go." The economic implications were transformative. Resources that had driven conflict for centuries became abundant through biological processing. Rare earth elements could be extracted and purified by organisms without environmental damage. Energy production through biological systems had made scarcity obsolete in most human settlements. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. Humanity had developed what sociologists called abundance consciousness. When basic needs were met through sustainable systems, when health was enhanced by environment rather than threatened by it, when technology worked with biology rather than against it, people focused on growth, creativity, and exploration rather than competition for limited resources. Lucas had become a symbol of this transformation. Born into crisis, raised during environmental collapse, he'd grown up as ecosystems healed around him. His generation had no memory of environmental anxiety, no experience of scarcity-driven conflict, no framework for understanding life as struggle against nature rather than cooperation with it. "My mom always tells me about the old world," Lucas addressed the summit's youth delegates, "where people thought they had to fight the environment to survive. I can't really understand that. Everything I've ever seen shows that when you help the environment, it helps you back. When you take care of life, life takes care of you." The summit concluded with announcements of the next phase of human expansion, missions to the outer planets where organisms would be tested in extreme environments, deep space vessels powered by biological systems that could theoretically operate for centuries, and proposals for interstellar probes carrying microorganisms capable of preparing distant worlds for human arrival. Sarah found herself holding back tears as she watched Lucas present his own proposal, a biological systems engineering program that would allow young people from across the solar system to collaborate on environmental projects that spanned worlds. He'd grown from her dying child into someone working to ensure life thrived throughout the universe. 10 years ago, she said during the closing ceremony, I thought I was buying land to save my son's life. I had no idea I was investing in the future of human civilization. The $200 I spent in desperation became the foundation for abundance beyond anything we'd imagined. As the summit ended and delegates began returning to their respective worlds, Sarah and Lucas remained on the station for an additional week of research collaboration. They spent hours in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate below, its healed atmosphere shimmering with health. "Mom," Lucas said one evening, as they watched the aurora borealis dance across Earth's polar regions, a phenomenon that had returned as the atmosphere restored itself, "do you ever regret it? Spending that money? Everything that followed?" Sarah thought of the desperate morning when she'd counted out her last bills, terrified of what would happen to them both. Then she looked at her son, healthy, brilliant, preparing to help engineer life support systems for humanity's expansion across the galaxy. She thought of the countless communities healed, the planet restored, the future unlimited. "The only thing I regret," she said, "is that it took desperation to make me brave enough to try something everyone said was impossible. But maybe that's how all the best discoveries happen, when we're forced to dig deeper than we thought we could." Lucas nodded, then activated a communication link to Earth. On the screen appeared the farmhouse where their journey began. Now, surrounded by the Helena Institute, but preserved exactly as it had been. Tourists from 3 worlds visited daily, learning how a single mother's desperate gamble had created the foundation for interplanetary civilization. "The tiny heroes are still there," Lucas observed, watching scientists in the laboratory complex conduct research that would determine the viability of biological systems on Jupiter's moons. Still working, still healing, still teaching us that life finds a way not just to survive, but to thrive. As they prepared to return to Earth, Sarah reflected on how completely their lives had transformed. Lucas was headed to MIT, but he'd already been accepted into advanced research programs on Mars and Luna. She'd been offered leadership positions with interplanetary environmental organizations, opportunities to shape policy across worlds. But the farmhouse would always be home. The place where a mother's desperation had met a planet's hidden capacity for renewal, where the smallest organisms had taught humanity its greatest lesson, that life's purpose wasn't just survival, but the endless improvement of conditions for all living things. "Ready to go home?" Sarah asked as they boarded the shuttle that would take them back to Earth. Lucas looked back at the space station, then ahead toward the blue-green planet that had taught them both that hope could be found in the most unlikely places, that healing was always possible, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to invest in life itself. "Home," he agreed, "where the tiny heroes are still working, still healing, still proving that everything broken can be fixed if you're willing to dig deep enough to find the solution." As their shuttle descended through Earth's restored atmosphere, they could see the networks of light that marked bioremediation sites across every continent. Each point of light represented a community transformed, an ecosystem healed, a piece of proof that the impossible was simply the possible, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. The $200 had bought more than land. It had purchased proof that desperation plus determination could equal transformation, that mother's love could move worlds, and that tiny heroes existed everywhere, waiting for humans wise enough to recognize them, brave enough to protect them, and visionary enough to carry their lessons to the stars. Below them, Earth sparkled with the bioluminescence of healing ecosystems, while above them, Luna and Mars glowed with the lights of thriving human settlements supported by the same biological principles. The network of life Sarah had accidentally discovered with her last $200 now spanned worlds, proving that some investments return dividends beyond imagination. The farmhouse grew larger as they descended, surrounded by proof that sometimes the most desperate moments create the conditions for the most extraordinary transformations. Where a dying child had once wondered if there was hope, a young man now dreamed of carrying life to the farthest reaches of space. The tiny heroes continued their work below, beside and beyond them, healing, growing, connecting, reminding everyone who paid attention that life's greatest power wasn't destruction or competition, but the endless, patient work of making everything around it better. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.